I'm here with Martin Langford, the DemocracyNZ candidate for Napier. Kia ora, Martin, and thanks for your time.
Good morning, and I appreciate being here. Thank you.
Now, Martin, on your Facebook page, you say that in Parliament, you will actively promote the party's policies of democracy, equality and unity, among other things. Do you seriously think you're going to become the MP for Napier?
I'm really hoping. Shoot for the moon, or shoot for the stars and land on the moon. I really do hope so. Yeah, that's what I'm hoping.
What are the odds? I mean, there's only, as far as I know, two main parties have dominated that seat, Labour and National. I mean, it's quite something for an outsider, especially a relatively new and small party to win a seat.
It's a huge ask, but the situation at the moment with Stuart Nash coming away from his post, I believe it's more of an open field this time. It certainly is. There's opportunities, and if it's not now, then when? Because now is the time when there's a lot of feeling that positive change needs to be made, and someone to step into the breach and not have the flip-flop between left. It's no longer left and right. It's getting New Zealand to go forwards, and I think that's where Democracy New Zealand actually fits.
Okay, and now I mentioned your party, Democracy New Zealand, is a relatively new party formed by former National MP Matt King. Can you briefly tell us what the party stands for?
Certainly, it started with Matt realising that he couldn't stay with National because they were not in opposition. They did not oppose the mandates when the mandates were in place. And we stand for freedom, for farming, for families. As we said, democracy, unity and equality. Those are basically the basics. Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but the party seems to be formed out of the protests at Parliament last year. Are you personally anti-mandates or anti-vaccines?
Definitely anti-mandate.
Okay. So
it's the freedom to choose.
You believe in vaccines?
I believe once they've been proven to be effective, certainly. I mean, I'm actually mandated and vaccinated to work myself. Yeah. But it's against the mandation, the mandatory imposition of that. It's totally inappropriate to force a medical procedure onto a person. Yeah. I mean, having worked in healthcare, as I have for over a quarter of a century here, and over 30 years in total, you've got to have a discussion. You've got to talk about the pros and cons. Let the person come to a decision, and then have that the conversation about, and give them the right to say, no, I refuse to have the treatment. Yeah. You know, as a dentist, that's what we have to do.
Well, that's why I was interested in your answer, because having a medical background, I was interested to know if vaccines you believe in, and you happy it's just the process of how they went about it.
And also, once you've got a vaccine that has been proven, you know, that it's gone through trials, that it is going to be safe, it is going to be effective, and then you can prove that.
And were the COVID ones, did that happen?
I think we're finding some information coming out now that is probably not what we want to hear. If you look at Australia, if you look at Europe, if you look around the world, what comments are coming up, and what the funds that are being created by governments to actually help people post the vaccination.
Okay, well, we won't go into more detail there because, you know, you say they're comments, so we'll have to see what the facts are with that. But you talk about seeing through fear-based narratives coming out of Parliament. What are these fear-based? On your website you said, you know, your party wants to see through the fear-based narratives that are coming out of Parliament. What are these narratives?
Well, I certainly think you've got to look at evidence over ideology, and if you've got proof that there is something is creating fear, then fine. But you've got to look at realism. You've got to be realistic and say, what's the evidence? What does the evidence point to in any matter?
Yeah. So you're talking particularly about vaccines and mandates and that, and creating fear, I would suspect. Yes. What else are you talking about? What other issues do you believe Parliament and this government in particular have created fear around?
We've also you're looking at climate as well, which is a big issue, and we've got several people in the party who have information regarding that, or have done the research and saying, well, we shouldn't be having a panic about it. Be concerned, see what's happening, look for the evidence, but we shouldn't have the you know, what are they calling it, the panic that's being created about it being, I'm trying to think what the term is in this, I was thinking about that.
So do you believe in man-made climate change?
I'm having a few doubts about it. I'm certainly looking at the information that's coming through and the proof that's coming through, and starting to think that there's the history, and if you go back in history and the specialists who are looking at that and saying, well, in history, we've gone through ebbs and flows, we've gone through ups and downs.
Isn't the evidence right around us at the moment?
Well, they seem to say it is, but it's not. That is being refuted by some parties, and some people, and some specialists.
Yeah, but the majority of the worldview is that climate change is man-made and it's getting worse.
And then you look at other people who do refute that, other people, specialists in the field who do refute that as well. So it's worthwhile getting all the information and getting it from both sides.
You have to admit that the debate has gone past that now, and that the majority of people and the majority of scientists and experts do believe that climate change is a real thing and that it was man-made.
I think if you then wait to see some other who give some airspace to people who've got an alternative opinion, we may find that down the line there will be other opinions that will come to the fore.
Well, they've had 20, 30 years. So.
And then we had Greta Thunberg, who said by 2023 we would be wiped out if we didn't stop using fossil fuels, and she's had to take that off her website because a specialist had told her that was the case, and that's just happened in the last month. But so there is other information that's out there, and the panic that was created.
But these 1 in 100 year events seem to be happening every few years. And so how do you explain that?
But at the end, again, if you look at it was Ian Wishart who's looked at the NIWA reports and found that they missed data out. Cyclone Bowler wasn't included in the data. So if you look at what's being missed by people in the data, you start to see that maybe the whole story isn't being given. We're not being given the full coverage. And I think with time, once the full coverage is brought out, we've got two members who are looking at an Official Information Act to get the information from NIWA and find out what was missed out of the data that gave them their results.
This sounds like a bit of a conspiracy theory, is it?
Not a conspiracy theory, common sense. Let's have common sense. If you go into an argument, let's have both sides having an even playing field and everyone being able to talk.
So who are the sides?
Well, you've got to ask everyone to the party and don't quash people. I mean, over the last 3 years, we've seen how freedom of speech has been suppressed. If you look at what's been happening, and you start to think, perhaps we should be hearing from other people who haven't been listened to.
Now, your leader, Matt King, was down recently. Just tell us, he had a couple of meetings, I think. How many people turned up to those, and what were some of the issues that people raised?
We had our first public meeting on the Friday evening out at Bayview. Approximately 200 at the first meeting, and then the next night we went down to Dannevirke, approximately 100 there down in Dannevirke. One of the majors was the problem with the mandates, and also water quality. That is one of the ones that is mentioned, people talking about the water issues.
What, three waters?
Yes, a lot of people talking about, we've now had our water chlorinated here in Napier, which it wasn't for many years. Is there going to be any progress on that? Fluoridation of water, and the three waters issues. The other one was that the late, and particularly when we're out in Bayview, of course, the late response from the government, or the poor show of central and local government in helping people after Cyclone Gabrielle.
What more could they have done?
Stepped in sooner.
Yeah. In what way?
Well, they seem to be absent. Yeah. They really seem to be absent. You had people, the locals going out, which is good, the community response, but they went out and brought people back on jet boats, on jet skis, and trucks that were going in, even though they'd been told by the authorities who had turned up not to go in, coming back with truckloads of people who've been up to their waists in water in their houses. It would have been good if they'd been in there. It would have been great if there'd been earlier warnings given, spread. Would have been fantastic.
So you think the mayors should have maybe declared civil emergency sooner?
I think so. And somebody should have known when they said it was going to be falling in the ranges. We were up in Auckland at the time and said, and if Hawke's Bay is going to be falling in the ranges, maybe someone at that point have thought, if it's going to fall in the ranges, it's going to come down the rivers, it's going to hit later. You always think about heavy rain being in the city causing the flooding. Surely somebody who's an expert or a specialist who was watching whatever alarms we have up country should have been ready to step in and say, there's trouble.
Yeah.
And in fact, I think it was Civil Defence the day before had done I didn't get to see it, but I saw it later, had actually said that they were seriously concerned that Hawke's Bay was going to have an extremely serious event, but that wasn't put out to the public.
Yeah. So were you you say you were in Auckland, were you in any way personally affected?
We were in Whangaparoa, so as it came down for the first few days, we watched as we were one street away from the beach at Whangaparoa, and we're just watching the water raise up around the building. Didn't quite get in, we were ready to sort of start blocking, and my people we were with, they didn't get much sleep, just waiting to see, and thankfully we got through both ends of it, and then the water just started to gradually go
and
down.
Your home, in Napier?
Was absolutely fine. And that's the very weird situation. We flew into a bubble. We'd landed at the airport. We'd seen from the airplane what we could, stay as we flew over it. It didn't look good. It's just brown. It was brown. It's just, normally you see the green grass, but this was brown. We flew into the airport, and from the airport back to our house, it was normal life. We just drove through. There was no flooding, there was no silt, because we're Green Meadows. And we brought back to our house. The only thing was out of power. But our family had been living in the house looking after the house while we were away. We've got gas, so they're able to cook. They've got plenty of they've got solar lights inside, so as it went dark. So I think they did 6 days without power.
Yeah.
But that was it. And then as soon as the power was back on, basically life was back to normal very quickly. But
and going up to Esk Valley with Matt,
yes.
What did you speak to people, and
yes.
What did they say?
It was all arranged. So we had a couple out there who were very involved with the Cafe Divine and the hub there, and they asked permission of any place, any properties we went to. So that before we turned up, and they said, right, we can go to these properties, we've got the owner's permissions, and we can go and take photos inside, so that it can't be identified as whose houses. But and they asked what we could do, or told us what were allowed to do, what the owners had given us permission for, and it was shocking. Walking into the houses there with the silt way 2/3 of the way up the walls, walking into a bedroom which was obviously a child's room, and thinking this is just very little space between the silt and the ceiling. Horrendous. The house, which has been moved 600 metres, which is now opposite Cafe Divine.
Yeah.
To think that whole house just lifted up, it's quite atrocious disaster.
And now you mentioned that you don't think the government moved quick enough on that. What could they be doing now? What more could they be doing now?
They could be showing their face a little bit more. Yeah. They could be getting involved more. When we go out, I've got close contacts who are in the information at the hubs, and they're just saying that they're absent, that there is nobody there. They come in and they like to give advice, but they're not actually there saying, well, we can provide you we can give extra funding to you, we can do something positive. Yeah. They should be moving faster as well on saying, make a decision. Will people be able to go back and live? The houses have been colour-coded, but the land itself hasn't been yet. And people are just, what do? How do they keep on going? The insurance only lasts for so long. Yeah. Coming to a decision, at the last meeting we went to where Stuart Nash was still working, and he said, it's going to take at least 6 weeks, I'll get back to you in 6 weeks. But there's still I don't think he's come back from that with a decision. And no one's telling the people whether they will be allowed to. And it's the hard decision. You say to people, if this is likely to happen again, you must build up on the side of the valley. Not crop your land's fantastic, crop the land, but live up on the side of the valley. Would that be so difficult? And then put a package in that allows people to do that, allows subdivision of some of the other sections to allow people to do that. But come to a decision that actually would help people, and soon, because people are getting to the end of their tethers.
Because the government has missed their own sort of deadline, getting back with the assessment, and they do say that they want to but they also want to get it right. So, but you hearing from people out there that there's frustration over this.
Absolutely. I mean, and the other thing is, when money did come in, it's the MB who gave it to the Chamber of Commerce, and then Chamber of Commerce didn't really have a clear idea of who they should be giving the money to, and dispersed. I mean, I think it was 23 million. That's the figure that I've got. Yeah. And it was given to businesses in the CBD who'd lost power for 4 days.
Now, you're originally from the UK and that.
From Birmingham.
Yeah, okay, and you've been here for quite a few years.
Here or Birmingham?
Yeah, you've been here.
I've been here 26 years now.
Okay, yeah.
26 years.
And so tell me a bit, were you political in the UK at all? Is it?
I was never political in the UK, and I wasn't really political here until about 3 years ago. I thought everything was going along quite nicely, and seemed to be ebbed and flow, left to right. Everything seemed fine, and it's only over the last 3 years that I've really decided that you can sit down and be quiet and get angry and put useless posts on Facebook and try to get people engaged, or you can actually do something useful and make a positive change. And it started with frustration, which then became anger, because I could see what was being posted, what was happening, and there was nothing I could do. As a dentist, the council had told us what we should do. Our association, which is basically our union, had told us what we should do. And I just felt that I had to do something. I had to get off out of the surgery and do something.
Was this all in relation to COVID, or what was this? What made you angry?
I think really it came after the protests, or we'd gone down to the protests, and hearing the misinformation, which is a lovely word that people like to use nowadays, about the protesters. We went down, we met teachers, firefighters, doctors, naturopaths, normal people who'd lost their jobs or were concerned about the mandates on affecting other work people. And they weren't, the description of them down there in the river of filth, which was brought about, and that became a very good tagline. The fact that they were saying that the protesters were throwing food or tomatoes or eggs at people at bus stops. Now, most of the protesters stayed on the grounds. What positive benefit does that give to a protester when you're protesting in front of Parliament to actually abuse your locals? And it's just crazy. Some of the things that were stated, it probably wasn't carried out by the protesters, who were basically just angry at the government and wanted someone to talk to them.
Surely you would admit that there was an element of the protesters, even if you say they were salt of the earth people and that, there was an element that was up to no good?
Not that I saw. Not that weekend, no.
And
I was amazed.
Being thrown at police?
That's at the end of that. That was at the end of the protest, which I wasn't there.
So was that acceptable?
No, it wasn't. But I mean, that's where you got the bad eggs come in, and also you wonder, you've got to break up a protest. You can break it up from within. And as the people we met, elderly people. There was a local from Wellington who was walking around with a sign saying, "If you want your washing done, talk to me, I'll take away your washing and bring it back to you." That was the atmosphere down there. People were chatting, everyone talked, they'd set themselves up a little church up in one of the buildings. It was an amazing setup. They were well organised, because we were there at the end of the first week, so it was just really sort of starting out when Mullard then put on the sprinklers.
Yeah. How long were you there for?
For that weekend.
So you slept over there?
Absolutely, slept down in Wellington in a motel.
Oh, okay. Not
on the ground. And we've met so many other people like that. So we were there for the protest during the day, during that evening, and then back down. And so we offered to take back clothing, because we had a washing machine. Obviously, we had facilities, and we were able to do that for people as well, to take that back. And then that's when we were there as well. We decided the food that people had laid on was fantastic, but we decided we're not living in tents. We're not going to take the food, even though there was so many of the food tents and the food providers. That was for the people down there who were doing the hard yards, who came down to set up their tents, and we helped people set up their tents. Yeah. We then donated tents later in the piece.
Because what you're describing is a happy family atmosphere, which I think if you took a poll of New Zealand, you would find probably a majority would say that's not their impression.
I know, and that's what's sad. That's what made me angry, because we came away from that and we were going to go back down again, and I caught COVID 2 weeks later. So I was lying on the couch just to caught COVID when it was the Wednesday when they cleared the camp.
You think you caught it from down there?
No, I caught it. It was 2 weeks later. Yeah. I caught that. I think I know where I caught it socially. Someone said they'd got just a bit of a cold or a bit of hay fever, and this was back in Napier. This was 2 weeks later. Down in the village, the protest, let's call it the protest, it was a brilliant atmosphere. I didn't see any, people were talking and chatting, we went past people. I personally didn't see any bad influences. I know that we've got a cousin who went down there, she's in her 60s. They were walking around one night around the precinct of Parliament, and suddenly found all this rubbish strewn everywhere. So they said, oh, this is ridiculous, and they went to pick it up. Next thing, there's a camera crew, suddenly appears. Oh yeah, we've heard there's rubbish strewn everywhere, it's just a mess down here. And he said, well, no, it's not, we're just tidying it up now. So you start to think of little things like that, where suddenly a camera crew knows that there's rubbish strewn around because the place was...
So what are you saying, the media, you're blaming the media
no,
for this?
not at all, no, but I believe that people could set up incidents and say, get on down there now, you might find that it's all looking a bit messy.
Yeah.
Just putting in a little bit of to disrupt what was a peaceful protest.
Now, you're a law-abiding citizen, and that was an illegal occupation. That was an illegal...
If you stayed overnight.
Yeah,
no. That's. I mean, it wasn't, because before there wasn't. This is what I found out on the day, or I'd looked up online. Because it's public land, you cannot be trespassed from Parliament, and particularly if it was during the work of hours of daylight. It's a public park. And then all of a sudden that disappeared, because later in the day they changed the rules. Then later in the day it becomes, if you wish to protest, you need to put it in writing and you have to wait for approval and tell them, and then it was limited to a number of hours. So there's several changes that went on later in the piece. This was on the Wednesday when it was getting closed down, and that changed online. That living document online changed.
Well, I'll try and verify that information. Because, as far as understanding I've got, the protests were illegal occupation of Parliament, and hence why the police eventually moved in. Yeah. Now, just getting back to local issues you're campaigning on. What are the burning issues that you hear at the level of Napier and you want to sort of help Napier people with?
I mean, I love being here in Napier. I've lived for 26 years. We've raised a family, used the education system. I've been a dentist and provided healthcare. Been a small business owner, as opposed to Matt King, who's a very freakishly tall business owner. And it's a lovely place, and I don't want to see it going downhill. And the problem is that the comments I'm getting are the smart ones are going to leave for Australia. If we and they're saying about the young people leaving and saying they don't want to live. The feeling is they don't want to live in Napier. They'll move out, and if they will, the grass is greener in Australia. And we don't want to. I don't want to see Napier starting to suffer. We need to do something that really energise it. And also Wairoa. I've got patients from the northern end of the electorate. And one of the ladies I was talking to was recently very concerned about Wairoa, that if they've got industry and work, it tends to be Gisborne related. It will get pushed towards Gisborne, and Wairoa's missing out when they could be using Wairoa as a hub, which it used to be used for, and it would be so good to get Wairoa up and running as well. So not just Napier itself here, this side of town, because this is what we tend to sort of think of as Napier, but Wairoa as well. And once the road's cleared, I'm hoping to go up there and actually have a meeting and talk with people up in Wairoa and get some what they feel is appropriate for their community.
Yeah. And the education system, what needs to change there?
Let's get back to basics. Reading, writing and arithmetic.
So like the National Party policy?
Well, if they were going to do that, yeah. I mean, they've had opportunities in the past, but to try
and... The National Party says they want to introduce an hour a day of reading and writing, and that. Do you agree with that?
I think anything that brings us back to a normal basic standard of education, which means that children leave the system numerate, literate, is to be applauded.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
And that's not happening now?
Not from what I've heard, that with the truancy rates and people in the work who are trying to employ people, finding that so many people are not literate, which is not good.
Now, you mentioned in your, when we were talking earlier, you mentioned that farming was also an important plank of your policy, and that. Tell us about that.
Well, obviously you've got Matt King, who's a beef cattle farmer up in far north. You've got Steve Cranston in the Waikato, and we've got a new candidate down in the South Island as well with all in farming. So they've got the history and saying that it is the backbone of the country, to not penalise farmers, but to actually encourage them, help them to be a good business for New Zealand.
Now, the National Party launched their sort of farming policy, and it was sort of clearing red tape and that sort of thing and making it easier for farmers. How does your policy differ from that?
it's probably along very similar lines, not to tax them, to actually encourage them to be doing good farming practices, which Matt King's is going to be our expert on that. Steve Cranston is very much with that, and that will come from them as to what would make farming easier. You've got people with practical experience who know what would work for the farming community.
Any other policies that you're strong on?
Anything, well, the three basics are still security, health and education. Those are really, if you've got that, then you've got a strong community. And so security involves law and order, but it also means putting back in the Bill of Rights, so you've got your own personal security, that you know that you've got a document, a legal document entrenched in the country, that you're not at risk. There's a lot to that.
And crime in Napier? Tell us about it.
Well, it depends who we're told that it was no worse during the Gabrielle crisis.
But the police said it went up for a week and then went back to normal levels.
And then you've still got people out there saying they've still got people coming along, walking onto the properties, loitering around, looking for anything they can pick from the debris. And we know that what happens in suburbs of Napier itself. I talked with my people from Wairoa, and they didn't seem to think it was much worse than before. They said up there it's just much, well, from what they can remember, it's a similar sort of, nothing. There's been no explosion up in Wairoa, but here you're just hearing of people saying, what's gone missing, what's been broken into. The shops in centre have now got the bollards reinstated, thank goodness, where they were having the repeated ram raids.
Yeah, okay. And so health, you mentioned health as well. What do you think the health situation is like in Napier, and do you think there can be improvements there? Yes,
that's an easy answer, isn't it? Yes. When we first arrived, there were the two hospitals. We had Napier Hill Hospital and we had Hastings Hospital, and we've just seen an event occurs. It could have been an earthquake, the bridges go down. What have we got? We've got a limited health response in Napier with the Wellesley Road Centre. The hospital is on the other side of the bridge system.
There should be a hospital in Napier?
I think there ought to be looked into. Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying go ahead and build it, but we ought to look into doing something and changing. I do believe that the system could be improved.
Yeah. Now, what can you offer that Katie Nimmin of National Party or whoever the Labour Party candidate will be can?
A lot of energy, a lot of experience, 26 years in the area, bringing up children, we've built houses, we've got experience of life in the area, and life experiences. I've also got experiences to draw on from the UK. So things that happen, I've seen what's happened around the world. I've travelled halfway around the world. I keep in contact with family back in the UK. A lot of common sense experience that could be brought to the party.
So in one sentence, why should the people of Napier vote for Martin Langford?
Because it could be a very sensible, common sense, good idea.
Well, Martin Langford, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it, and all the best for the election.
Thank you very much.